Hi folks, this is audio commentary on the reading assignment in London and Stone's short course in photography, the digital 4th edition. And your assignment was to have viewed some of the basic exposure theories of YouTube channel programs that I put up. And now you've already read this. If you haven't read it, then stop this audio right now and can go and read pages 60 to 63. And I'm assuming that now you're ready to listen to a little bit of commentary about this. So the first thing I want to tell you about is that the histogram on the back of a DSLR, and you can go into your menu settings for display, and every camera is different, but look it up in your camera guidebook, how to display a histogram. And right after you shoot the picture, you can examine a graph which shows up on your LCD screen on the back of the camera, and that is a gold mine of information, and it's one of the huge leaps forward between film photography and digital photography. When you shot film, you never knew if you got close to the right exposure. You relied on light meters. You relied on the f/16 rule. But you never knew whether you had a good reading or not. When the DSLR came along and the engineers built this histogram graph into the back of the camera, it gave photographers instant feedback on whether or not they had over or under or properly exposed their picture. So I want you to look at the bottom left corner of page 60, and there's a black and white histogram there. Now on your camera, when your histogram displays, by default, the left side of the graph will refer to pure black, and the right side of the graph will appear as pure white. Now, a little bit further into our reading, we're going to come up against a phrase that's called average reflectance. So things reflect light, and when the camera is pointed at a scene where you have lights and darks and middle grays and light grays and midtones, what you should see on your histogram, if you've properly exposed it, are some sort of mountains. They could be low hills, or they could be tall peaks. But the histogram should span all the way from black to white. There is no shape that is like a bell-shaped curve. Some people think, oh, my histogram has to look like a bell-shaped curve, and that's totally wrong. How do you know whether you have a successful exposure? We call it the mountain range, and you can kind of see that it looks like a very jagged mountain range in the bottom left corner of page 60. As long as you have some sort of peaks and valleys all the way from one side to the other, you have a really good exposure if you are taking a picture of a sunny day outdoors. You have trees, you have sky, you have roads, you have cars, and that is what we call an average reflectance subject. Later on, we're going to learn that this light meter actually in the camera can be fooled. And if you're taking a picture of something like a snow-covered mountain up close, you're up in Flagstaff, you're on the ski slopes, you're aiming your camera at somebody skiing down at you, that is not an average reflectance subject. So your histogram is going to look very different when you properly expose something that has lots and lots and lots of very light tones. So understand that most of the time you're taking pictures of things that are average reflectance, and you should learn to read your histogram on the back of your camera. And if you see that most of the mountain range is creeping up on the right, and look on the bottom of page 61, you have 3 different histograms for 3 different exposures. So if the mountain range seems to creep over towards the right side of the histogram, you are overexposing. You're getting too much light. So the opposite, go over to the left side of those 3 illustrations, and you'll see that the histogram, the mountain range is clustering over on the dark edge, and if you look behind it, you'll see that the image is too dark. So, I'm sorry, look at the captions here. You have underexposure, overexposure, and then in the right corner we have proper exposure. I picked the wrong one to talk about. But a normal exposure is going to have the mountain range between the light side and the dark side. There are many fine points. There are ways that you can look at different color channels. There are people who get very caught up in the fact that I'm capturing in RAW, but the histogram on the back of my camera creates a JPEG image, so it's really not exactly correct. So these are a lot of very fine points, and if you want to do a little web research on that, go ahead, but it's really not the most important thing right now. Just getting the idea of what does an overexposed or underexposed histogram look like, and when you see that, then you have to alter your either your f-stop or your shutter speed and correct it. You're either going to have to let in more light or less light. Now, page 62, we have a handheld light meter, and that's out in the upper right hand corner. And at the bottom of page 62, we have a reflected light meter, and these are important distinctions to make. Let's study the diagrams on top of page 63 where the sun is shining on a potted plant. Okay, so if it is a reflected light meter, what happens is the sun interacts with the subject, and the rays of light are weakened because some of it absorbs light, some of it reflects light. And you either are holding a handheld meter looking at the subject, or you're holding a camera with a built-in reflected light meter, and it's pointing at the subject, and you are reading the amount of light that is left over after it has bounced off of these objects. That is different than an incident light meter. And the diagram to the right says an incident light meter measures the amount of light falling on the subject. Now, this incident light meter is more accurate in many ways than your camera, but it is not always useful. So if I'm a wedding photographer and I line up a bride and a groom, and the bride's in white and the groom is in black, I would probably want to take an incident light reading. So that means that I would walk up close to the couple and I would point my incident light meter at where the camera is going to be. I don't point it at the couple, but I put it in the exact same amount of light that the couple is standing in, and then I get a reading for an f-stop and a shutter speed, and I've already pre-programmed my ISO into the handheld meter so that it matches what I'm using. So this is very important distinction. The incident light meter is probably more accurate at rendering tonalities, but it doesn't take me long to imagine a situation. Maybe I'm going to World Wildlife Zoo and I want to take a picture of the white tiger. Well, folks, I am not going to get into the tiger's cage. I'm not going to walk up to the tiger and hold an incident light meter in front of its face and point it at where my camera is going to be. Totally unacceptable. I'm for sure you could figure that out for sports photography. You can't run out onto the field and take an incident light reading. So sometimes you have to have a reflected light meter. Now, bottom of page 62, the camera sees the subject as a subject that will be middle gray. We call that 18% gray. And even though the camera is looking at, I'm not sure what that is up above it, that's what the camera is aimed at, the camera translates that into this middle gray. And it calculates an exposure, and then when the picture's taken, you look at the histogram and you hope that everything is lined up between the extremes, between black on the left and white on the right. Just remember that a camera is programmed by the engineers. It's programmed to see the world as middle gray. When we take our camera up to Flagstaff and we take ski pictures, we don't want to have gray snow, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Now, diagram on the bottom of page 63. The spot meter, I use that occasionally when I'm trying to read just one part of the picture and trying to get a light reading off of that. But that's kind of for advanced users. I don't use it that much. I go to the multi-segment meter, and that's a very nifty, flashy, and very cool kind of metering where the camera actually does some checking on internal tables to try and figure out what kind of a picture you're taking, whether you're taking a landscape or a portrait, and it will give you the best of everything. So the textbook can only give you some generalizations. This is where you need to use the index in your camera guide, and you need to look up metering modes. How do I change from one meter to another? And like I say, I normally shoot on this multi-segment thing for most of my pictures, but read about it in your textbook.